I wasn't even worth mentioning, my father said at his retirement party, his voice echoing in the grand hall. The words stung more than I expected. He didn't even look at me when he said them. As the room fell silent, I felt my chest tighten. I was a ghost in my own family, a person overlooked and dismissed by the very people who should have cared the most. Dad, who had spent his life building his empire, stood proudly before his colleagues. But when he finally turned to me, there was nothing but indifference. I wasn't even worth a mention. For years, I had hoped for a moment like this, a moment where I could stand proudly by his side, maybe hear him say something, anything, about me. But instead, there I stood, ignored, invisible, just another face in the crowd. My mother sat beside him, her smile perfectly rehearsed, as if she didn't notice the ache in my chest. But I noticed. I always did. The tension in the room was thick with unspoken words. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself worthy of their attention. I was always the one who tried the hardest, the one who showed up at every family event, the one who took care of the details that nobody else bothered with. But none of that seemed to matter. As my father continued his speech, the room applauded him for his years of hard work, but no one clapped for me. No one ever did. After the event, I sat alone in the back of the room, staring at the empty folder in my hands. It had my name on it, but it felt like a cruel joke. My father's boss, who had just made a heartfelt speech about my father's contributions, came up to me and without a second thought, opened the folder that contained my life's work. He didn't even ask if it was mine. He just glanced at it, then set it aside without a word. And in that simple action, I realized I was nothing to them. I wasn't even worth acknowledging. My heart sank. How could I have spent all these years chasing approval from people who would never see me? How could I have hoped for something that was never meant to be mine? And yet I smiled. Through it all. I always did. I walked out of that room with my head held high, despite the crushing weight in my chest. I wasn't going to let them see how much they hurt me. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. I walked back to my car, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on my chest. For the past few weeks, I had been preparing for this moment, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this retirement party would be different. I had hoped that this would be my chance to prove to my parents, to my father especially, that I was worthy of their attention. But now, with each step I took, the harsh reality settled in deeper. I had been forgotten. I had always been forgotten. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly. The tears threatened to spill, but I held them back. Crying wouldn't change anything. My whole life, I had been the one who tried the hardest. I worked hard in school. I worked hard in the family business. I worked hard to earn their respect. But all those years of effort had been for nothing. I thought about the folder I had seen earlier, the one my father's boss had opened with such little care. It wasn't just about the folder. It was about everything. It was about how I had always been invisible in my own family, always second to everyone else. My father had always praised his colleagues, his business partners, but never me. No matter what I did, it was never enough. I had always been proud of my father. He was a self-made man, someone who had built everything from the ground up. I admired him for his strength and determination. But today, as I sat in my car, I realized something. I had spent so many years trying to gain his approval, trying to be a part of his world, but it was never going to happen. He didn't care. He never cared. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of my phone buzzing. I looked at the screen. It was a message from my mother. "Your father is looking for you," he said. "You didn't come to congratulate him at the party. You missed your chance." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart sinking even further. I couldn't even bring myself to respond. The words were like a slap in the face. You missed your chance. As if this was just another opportunity one had failed to seize. I knew what she was saying. I had failed again. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring out the window, trying to process everything. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't understand. How had I become this person? How had I allowed myself to be treated like this for so long? I had spent my entire life trying to earn love and respect, but all I had received in return was rejection. I took a deep breath and wiped away a single tear that had slipped down my cheek. This was it. The moment when I realized that if I was ever going to change things, it had to start with me. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my family, always looking for validation from people who would never give it to me. I needed to let go. Let go of the need for their approval. Let go of the years of hurt. And most importantly, let go of the idea that I wasn't enough. Because I was. I always had been. I sat there for a long time, the car's engine still running, but I wasn't moving. My thoughts raced, but no matter how much I tried to make sense of everything, it still didn't add up. How had my life come to this point? I had spent years being the dutiful daughter, the one who was always there when they needed me. But it was never enough. It had never been enough. As I stared out the window, I thought about the moments that led up to today. The countless family dinners where I tried to make myself visible, the phone calls I made to check in, the birthday cards I sent, always hoping for something more in return. But there was nothing. It was like I didn't even exist in their world, except when they needed something from me. My father, the man I looked up to for so long, had been distant. He never called me unless it was about something business-related. Even then, he would cut me off mid-sentence if it was inconvenient for him. I had tried to brush it off, convincing myself that it was just the way he was, that he didn't mean to be this way. But after today, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. My father didn't care. Not in the way a father should care about his child. I thought about all the times he praised his colleagues in front of me, but never once said anything about me. It wasn't just that I was ignored, it was that I was overlooked entirely. Like a shadow in the corner, always present, but never acknowledged. That folder, the one my father's boss had opened first, it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of how much I had been disregarded. I could feel the weight of it now, pressing against my chest. I had worked hard for years to build something, to prove that I was capable, that I was worthy of being a part of something greater than myself. But all I had received in return was silence. I thought back to the message from my mother earlier. She had said that my father was looking for me. He was upset that I hadn't congratulated him. But what about me? Why hadn't anyone acknowledged how much I had sacrificed just to be a part of this family? The tears that I had been holding back for so long began to fall. But I didn't make a sound. I couldn't. I had spent too much time hiding my feelings, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. It was time to stop pretending. I didn't have to keep fighting for their approval. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth, but no one had ever asked me what I needed. They had all taken me for granted. I thought about what I had learned from today. I had learned that I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. It was time for me to live for myself. I wiped my tears away, took one last look at the family home in the distance, and started the car. I wasn't running away. I was walking away, and this time, it was for good. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going. The road stretched out in front of me, endless and quiet, much like the space that had opened up between me and my family. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The rejection, the silence, the years of living in their shadows. I had been invisible for so long, but now, for the first time, I was free. Free from their expectations, free from the constant need to prove myself. It was a strange feeling. A feeling of relief mixed with uncertainty. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. I couldn't return to the place where I had been nothing more than an afterthought. The life I had built around my family, around my father's approval, had crumbled. And now, I was standing at the edge of something new, something unknown. The tears had stopped. The numbness had taken over. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt empty. The silence in my car was overwhelming, but at the same time, it was peaceful. For once, I wasn't trying to fill it with words, with excuses, with justifications. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone anymore. I didn't need to fight for their love or their recognition. I had spent so long trying to fit into their world, but now I was realizing that I had to create my own. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. But for the first time, I felt a sense of control over my own life. I wasn't at the mercy of their indifference anymore. I wasn't living for their approval. The road ahead felt both terrifying and exciting. It was a path that I had to walk alone, but I knew I was strong enough to do it. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me, but I was ready to find out. As I drove further away from everything I had known, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't just the distance from my family, it was the distance from the person I had been, the one who had constantly sought their validation. I was ready to leave that person behind. I wasn't going to look back. The world was wide open in front of me, and for the first time, I felt like I had the chance to truly live for myself. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that I had the power to shape it. And that was enough for me. I found a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a quiet place where I could think without the pressure of expectations. I had been driving for hours, and my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts I couldn't quite organize. I sat down at a table by the window, the sun casting a warm glow on the street outside. The silence in the cafe was a relief, a contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to just be still. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the road that had brought me here. The years of trying to fit into a family that never saw me, never acknowledged me. My father's retirement party had been the breaking point, the moment when everything I had been suppressing came flooding to the surface. But now, sitting in this quiet cafe, I was starting to feel something else. I was starting to feel free. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove myself to anyone. I wasn't waiting for a phone call or a text to tell me that I mattered. I wasn't seeking their approval anymore. I had spent so many years in that toxic cycle, trying to be good enough for people who would never see me for who I truly was. But now it was different. I was different. I looked out the window, watching people go about their day, and I realized something. I had spent so much time thinking about what I had lost, my family, their love, their approval. But I had never stopped to think about what I had gained. I had gained my freedom. I had gained the ability to make choices for myself, to decide my own path. It wasn't easy. It wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't going back to the way things were. I wasn't going to keep chasing after people who would never understand me. I was going to build a new life, one where I could finally be true to myself. I stood up and paid for my coffee, the weight in my chest lifting with every step I took toward the door. I didn't know where I was going next, but for the first time, I felt excited about the future. The road ahead was mine to walk, and I was ready to take that first step. I drove for hours, the city skyline fading in my rearview mirror, until the hum of the tires on the asphalt became a comforting rhythm. The road ahead stretched out, empty and open, like the future I had once feared but was now embracing. I had always thought that my family was the center of my world, the one thing I could rely on. But now, I was learning that the world didn't have to revolve around them. It was time to learn how to build a life where I was the priority. The truth was hard to swallow, but I had to face it. My entire life had been about seeking approval from people who would never see me as anything more than a tool, someone to be used when convenient. I had spent too many years fighting for their recognition, their affection, and in return, I got nothing but empty promises. My father had never really seen me for who I was. He saw his achievements, his success, and in all that, I was just a shadow, barely a whisper in the background. It was hard to admit, but the pain of that realization was now starting to fade. I wasn't just moving away from them physically. I was moving away from that version of myself that kept seeking validation from a place that would never give it. I had always kept my head down, always tried to make them proud, but what had that gotten me? A life full of regret and unspoken words. No more. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose my future. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the weight that had been on my shoulders for so long was beginning to lift. The life I had once envisioned for myself, one where I was seen, loved, and appreciated, wasn't going to come from my family. It was something I had to build for myself. As I passed the familiar landmarks of my hometown, I couldn't help but feel a small pang of nostalgia. But it wasn't a feeling of longing anymore. It was a reminder of who I was before all of this. And that person wasn't someone who needed anyone else to tell her who she was. She knew. I knew. I wasn't a daughter in need of approval. I was a woman who was ready to take control of her own life. I turned the music up in the car, the familiar tune filling the space, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't need them. I didn't need anyone else. I only needed me. I had the power to make choices, to move forward, and to stop letting the past dictate my future. The road ahead was mine to travel, and for the first time, I was excited to see where it would lead. I had driven for miles, not entirely sure where I was going, but feeling a sense of freedom I hadn't known I'd been craving. It was a strange feeling, knowing that I was alone in this journey, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine to shape. I stopped at a small diner just outside of town. The smell of coffee and pancakes hit me as soon as I walked in. The place was quiet, just a few scattered patrons enjoying their meals. I took a seat by the window, watching the world go by, realizing how much I had been missing. The quiet moments. The peace of being in control of my own life. The waitress brought me a cup of coffee, and I smiled at her. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than I could express. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to be anyone other than who I was. I didn't have to put on a show for anyone. No more pretending to be the perfect daughter, the perfect employee, the perfect person. I could just be me. It was a relief to not carry the weight of expectations anymore. I could feel the tension that had been building in my shoulders for years slowly start to ease. I could see it in my reflection, too. The woman in the mirror wasn't the one I had been. Just a few weeks ago. She was different. She was stronger. I thought back to the moment I left my family behind. It had been the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew it was the right choice. I had spent my entire life seeking approval, trying to meet the standards that had been set for me. But those standards weren't mine. They were someone else's. They were never going to be enough for me, because they didn't align with who I truly was. It wasn't about rejecting them. It was about rejecting the version of myself that had been built on their terms. The woman I was becoming was mine, and only mine. It was a liberating thought. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their approval. I had been living for them for so long that I had forgotten what it was like to live for myself. But now, that was all changing. I was starting over. It was scary, sure, but there was also a thrill to it. The future felt wide open, full of possibilities. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I was running towards something. A life where I could finally be free of the chains that had held me down for so long. I finished my coffee and stood up, ready to continue my journey. I wasn't sure where it would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to find out. And for the first time, I was excited to see where that road would lead. I woke up the next morning with a strange sense of clarity. The sun was rising, casting a soft glow through the blinds of the small apartment I had rented for the night. The city was still, the usual rush of people and cars waiting to begin another day. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to rush. I had always been on the go, always in a hurry to meet someone's expectations, always running towards something I was never sure of. But now, the only thing I needed to do was breathe, to take a moment and just exist. I stood up from the bed and walked to the window. I looked out at the city below, the streets filled with people, rushing to their destinations, and for a brief second, I felt completely out of place. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I wasn't running their race anymore. It was like I had stepped out of a maze, one I had spent so long trying to navigate, and now, for the first time, I was free to walk in my own direction. I had spent years trying to make others proud, trying to fit into a life that wasn't mine, all for the sake of approval. I had been the dutiful daughter, the one who always tried to please, always tried to be enough. But I realized that I had been chasing something that didn't exist, the approval of people who never really saw me. My father, my mother, they were both stuck in their own world, too consumed by their own lives to notice that I had been drowning in silence. But that was no longer my problem. I was no longer going to let their indifference define who I was. The person I had been, the one who lived in the shadows, the one who played by their rules, was gone. I was starting anew, and I didn't have to apologize for it. I didn't have to apologize for taking up space in this world, for taking control of my life. I was worthy of my own love, my own attention, my own happiness. The road ahead wasn't clear, and that was okay. I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to know what would happen tomorrow. All I needed to know was that I was in control now. I wasn't looking for anyone's validation anymore. It was time to live for myself. And as I stood there, looking out at the world, I realized that for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready for it. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to shrink myself for anyone. I was going to live life on my own terms, and nothing was going to stop me. I had been on the road for a few days now, far from the life I had known, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The anxiety that had once gripped my chest, the constant need to be seen and appreciated, had started to fade. It was as if the further I drove, the lighter I felt. Each mile was a step away from the life I had left behind, and the future, while uncertain, no longer seemed as daunting. I had found a small town, tucked away in the quiet hills, a place where the noise of the world didn't reach, and it felt like the perfect place to start over. The town was simple, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the air was fresh and the sky was endless. It was a stark contrast to the life I had left, the constant chaos, the need to impress, the endless striving for approval. I rented a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It was the first place in a long time that felt like it truly belonged to me, a place where I didn't have to pretend to be someone else. As the days passed, I started to settle into the rhythm of my new life. I spent time exploring the town, visiting the local bookstore, grabbing coffee at the little cafe on Main Street. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what anyone else expected from me. I wasn't worrying about whether my parents were proud of me or if I was living up to some standard. I was just living, and it was enough. The peace I had been craving was finally here, and I could feel the tension in my body begin to release. But even in this newfound tranquility, there were moments of doubt. There were times when I would catch myself thinking about what I had left behind, my family, the life I had known. I would wonder if I had made the right decision, if I had done the right thing by walking away. But those thoughts were fleeting. I reminded myself that this was my life now, and I had every right to live it on my terms. I wasn't bound by anyone's expectations anymore. Slowly, I started to rebuild. I found a job at a local gallery, something that allowed me to express myself and connect with the world in a way I hadn't been able to before. I made new friends, people who didn't know my history, who didn't have any preconceived notions about who I was. And for the first time, I felt like I could be myself without apology. As the weeks went by, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I was starting to believe that the life I had been chasing wasn't the one I needed. I had found something far more valuable: my own peace, my own freedom, and the courage to live a life that was truly mine. I was starting to feel like my new life was finally taking shape. It had been months since I left everything behind, and the weight I had carried for so long was slowly disappearing. The small town I had settled into had become home, not just because of the place itself, but because of the way it had allowed me to breathe, to finally feel like I was in control. The gallery job I had found wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. It gave me purpose and a chance to connect with people who didn't know my past. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by what I could do for others. I was just myself, and that felt better than I could ever have imagined. My mornings were quiet, filled with the simple routine of a cup of coffee, a walk through the park, and then heading to the gallery where I spent my afternoons surrounded by art. I had started to meet new people, ones who saw me for who I was now, not who I used to be. It was refreshing, like taking a deep breath after years of holding it in. One evening, as I was locking up the gallery, I saw a familiar face walking toward me. It was John, the local bookstore owner, a man I had met a few weeks ago. He was holding a book in his hand, a title I didn't recognize. "I thought you might enjoy this," he said with a warm smile, handing it to me. "I know you love to read, and I thought this one might interest you." I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Thank you, I appreciate it," I said, taking the book from him. As he turned to leave, he paused for a moment. "I hope you're doing okay, Emma," he said, his voice sincere. "You seem like someone who's been through a lot, but you're stronger for it." His words lingered in the air long after he had walked away, and for the first time in a while, I felt seen. Not as a daughter or a worker or someone seeking approval, but as just a person. I had come so far since leaving my old life behind, and the journey wasn't over yet. But I was beginning to realize that I didn't need to know exactly where I was going. The fact that I was moving forward, living in the present, and finding happiness in the small things was enough. I didn't need a grand plan anymore. I just needed to keep going, keep living, and keep embracing the life that I had finally started to build for myself. The sun was setting as I walked home that night, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange. It felt like a sign that everything was falling into place. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in my life, I was truly happy. I woke up to the sound of rain against the window, a steady rhythm that matched the calmness I felt inside. It had been a few months since I made the decision to leave everything behind, and while there were days when I still questioned myself, most days, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The small town had become my sanctuary, a place where I could rebuild without the weight of my past hovering over me. I had found peace here, a peace I never thought I'd find. My mornings were spent in quiet solitude, sipping coffee and reading the books John had recommended, each page taking me further from the person I had been and closer to the person I was becoming. The life I had once known seemed so distant now, like a faded memory that I could barely recall. The job at the gallery was more than just work. It was a space where I could express myself, where I could be part of something without the pressure to perform or be perfect. I no longer felt invisible. Every day, I felt a little more confident, a little more grounded. I had met people who didn't know my history, who saw me for who I was now, not the version of me that had been defined by my family's expectations. It was a strange feeling to be seen for the first time in my life, and I was beginning to like it. One evening, as I was walking back to my apartment after closing the gallery, I saw a familiar face walking toward me. It was John again, the bookstore owner. He had a smile on his face, and this time, there was no book in his hand, just his warm presence. "Hey Emma," he greeted me. "How are you doing?" I smiled back, feeling a genuine connection with him. "I'm doing well. Really well, actually," I replied. He looked at me for a moment, studying me with a thoughtful expression. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "You deserve it, you know." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had heard similar things before, but this time, they felt different. They felt true. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to fight for my worth. I had learned to accept myself, to value myself, and I was finally starting to understand that I was worthy of the good things in life, just as I was. We stood there for a moment, the rain falling softly around us, and in that quiet space, I realized something. I had come a long way. The road had been difficult, filled with doubts and fears, but I had made it. I wasn't the same person I had been when I left home. I wasn't the person who sought validation from others anymore. I was strong, independent, and capable of living a life that was entirely my own. As John said goodbye and walked away, I stood there for a few moments longer, watching the rain fall. I had come full circle, from a place of uncertainty and pain to a place of peace and self-acceptance. And for the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was ready to move forward, to live the life I had always deserved, without the need to prove myself to anyone. I had been living in the small town for nearly a year now, and in that time, I had grown into a version of myself I hardly recognized. The walls I had built up around me were slowly crumbling, not because of anything outside, but because of the strength I had found within myself. I had learned to trust myself again, to believe in my own worth without needing the approval of anyone else. The gallery had become more than just a job. It had become a place where I could express who I was, where I could share the pieces of myself that had been buried for so long. The people I met here were kind, real, and saw me for who I truly was. No pretenses, no expectations, just me. I spent my days surrounded by the things I loved. Art, books, music, and people who didn't judge me based on a past that no longer defined me. As the months passed, I found myself growing more comfortable in this life, this new chapter that I had started for myself. I was building something lasting, and it was mine. It was an empowering feeling. I still thought about my family from time to time. The memories of how they treated me, the silent expectations, the feeling of never being good enough, they still lingered in the back of my mind. But every time I thought about them, I realized that they no longer had a hold on me. I was no longer waiting for them to change or for them to apologize. I had forgiven them, not for them, but for myself. I had to let go of the anger, the resentment, and the hurt in order to move forward. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had spent so many years holding on to that pain, letting it define who I was, and I was finally free of it. I was not the person they had tried to shape me into. I was not the daughter they had wanted me to be. I was Emma, and I was enough, just as I was. One evening, I sat in the gallery after hours, a cup of tea in my hands, listening to the quiet hum of the street outside. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I had never known before. And for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was making a mistake. I wasn't trying to please anyone anymore. I was living my truth, and it felt like home. There was a sense of completeness in that moment, a feeling, a belonging that I had never experienced before. It wasn't because of anything external. It wasn't because of the job, the town, or even the people I had met. It was because I had finally found a place where I could be myself, without apologies, without shame. I had found peace with who I was, and that was more than I had ever expected to find. The future still felt unknown, But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of what was coming because I knew that whatever it was, I could handle it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, fully, completely, and unapologetically. I had been in the town for a year now, and with each passing day, I found myself more at peace. The weight I had carried for so long, the constant striving for approval and validation, had faded away, replaced with a quiet confidence I never knew I had. The life I was living now, simple and steady, felt real. It felt mine. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The gallery was thriving, and so was I. I had found my place, not just in the town, but in the world. I no longer wondered what my parents thought of me, or if I was ever going to be good enough for them. I had long stopped seeking their approval because I had learned something more important. I didn't need it. I had made peace with my past. It was like the final chapter of a book I had been reading for years, one full of disappointment, hurt, and false expectations. And now, that chapter was over. I was writing my own story now, one that didn't need to be dictated by anyone else. As I walked through the streets of the town, I began to realize how far I had come. The woman I was now was someone I could look at in the mirror and be proud of. I wasn't the daughter seeking validation anymore. I wasn't the worker who always tried to please others. I was simply me, and that was enough. The past still had its grip on me at times. There were moments when I would see someone who reminded me of my old life, and I would feel a pang of sadness or longing. But those moments were fleeting. I had learned to let them pass without letting them consume me. I was no longer a prisoner of my past. I was free. The future still felt uncertain. There were days when I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of it. I had learned to trust myself, and that was all I needed. As the days turned into months, I found myself making plans, not just for the next year, but for the future I wanted to build. I was taking control of my life in a way I never had before, and it felt good. It felt right. The woman who had been defined by her family's expectations, the one who had tried to fit into a life that wasn't hers, was gone. And in her place stood a woman who had found her own path, who had learned that the only validation she needed was her own. And that, above all else, was the greatest gift I had ever given myself. Toi with grave nbnoi dung chuin thun, a with circumflex ton, I had spent so much of my life waiting. Waiting for validation. Waiting for approval. Waiting for someone to tell me that I was good enough. But now, I realized that waiting had only kept me trapped in a cycle that I no longer needed. The truth was simple, and yet it had taken me so long to see it. I didn't need anyone to tell me that I was enough. I already knew. I had spent months building a life that was truly mine, and I was starting to see how much I had grown. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. The gallery was thriving, and I had found a rhythm in my work that gave me satisfaction. I wasn't just doing something to fill the time. I was creating. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was where I was meant to be. I wasn't constantly comparing myself to others, wondering if I was falling behind or not doing enough. I was doing the best I could, and that was more than enough. The people I had met here in the town had become more than just acquaintances. They were my friends now. They saw me for who I truly was, not for the person I had tried to be. It was refreshing, this sense of being understood, of being accepted without having to explain myself. It wasn't something I had ever really known before. It wasn't just the gallery or the town or the people around me that had made the difference. It was me. I had changed. I had stopped waiting for life to happen to me and started living it on my own terms. It felt like a revelation every time I reminded myself of that. The life I was building wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was all that mattered. One evening, as I sat in the gallery, closing up for the night, I looked around at the paintings, the sculptures, and the pieces of work I had spent so much time curating. They weren't just objects to me anymore. They were a reflection of who I had become. Every piece told a story of transformation, of growth, of stepping into something new. And I realized that I was no longer just the person I had been in the past. I was a different person now, one who no longer needed to chase approval, one who was finally free to be herself. It wasn't a grand moment. There was no dramatic change. It was simply a quiet understanding, a peace that settled deep within me. I was where I was supposed to be. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove it to anyone.